You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it, and it goes down smooth. Hey!
Spanning the globe to bring you the latest developments in medical cannabis, adult marijuana, industrial hemp, and spiritual ganja. It's time for the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville. Now, here's your host, Russ Belville.
Good day, tokers and tokettes and non-toking lovers of liberty. It is Friday, January 26, 2018, and it's got to be 420 somewhere in the world. Just getting things back up and running here at Delta 9 House and Studios after 2 days at the Cannabis Collaborative Conference, and it was a great show. My thanks go out to Mary Lou Barton for having us out there. CCC 4.0 was great, and we had a booth there for the Delta 9 House and Studios, and it just so happened that the local NBC News affiliate, KGW News, showed up and interviewed me, and it was featured on the 6 o'clock news here locally in Portland, Oregon. And I also heard someone mention they saw it on King 5 up in Seattle. So Delta 9 House getting some renown in the Pacific Northwest. That was a lot of fun. But also the big thing that came out of CCC for me was getting to see a presentation by the top regulators of the Pacific Northwest from the state of Washington and then from our state of Oregon, Steve Marks, the head of the Oregon Liquor Control Commission. And after the presentation, I got a chance to speak with Mr. Marks for about 3 minutes, got him on tape, reacting to some statistics having to do with marijuana and minors. And that will be the subject of our our drug war. I've been off for a while. That'll be the subject of our radical rant coming up at the end of the show. So I'm going to take a look at some of the stats and find out what the hell is going on with Oregon. Also, we're going to take a look at our nearby state, the state of Idaho. I got a message from someone on Facebook. They sent me a copy of a letter they received from Idaho Senator Jim Risch. They had sent some messages to him about support for marijuana legalization. They got the stock answer back from Idaho Senator Jim Risch. We're going to take a look at that in our Reefer Madness Debunked segment today, right after the cannabis headline news. And we've got a lot of stuff to cover in the news as well. Just breaking news here in the state of Oregon. Reactions to the recent minor decoy operations and a tripling of penalties for marijuana retailers that sell to minors. Also, we've got more news from Idaho as well to get into, so let's get to it.
This is your Cannabis Headline News. Brought to you by MarijuanaMoment.net, the complete source for all your marijuana news in one morning newsletter from Marijuana Majority Founder Tom Angel. Subscribe today for free at MarijuanaMoment.net.
This is your Cannabis Headline News for Friday, January 26, 2018. I'm Russ Belville. A bipartisan group of 54 U.S. senators and House members are joining together with urgent concern to ask President Trump to uphold his campaign pledge to respect state marijuana laws. Earlier this month, Attorney General Jeff Sessions rescinded Obama-era guidance known as the Cole Memorandum that has generally allowed states to implement their own cannabis laws without federal intervention. Quote, "This action has the potential to unravel efforts to build sensible drug policies that encourage economic development as we are finally moving away from antiquated practices that have hurt disadvantaged communities," end quote. The group of lawmakers, led by Senator Elizabeth Warren, Democrat of Massachusetts, and Representative Jared Polis, Democrat of Colorado, wrote to the president on Thursday, continuing, quote, "These new policies have instead helped eliminate the black market sale of marijuana and allowed law enforcement to focus on real threats to public health and safety." The Oregon Liquor Control Commission today approved a temporary rule increasing the penalties for retail licensees of marijuana that sell marijuana to minors. The rule includes a provision to revoke an individual marijuana worker's permit if the permittee intentionally sells marijuana to a minor. For a first-time offense of the unintentional sale of marijuana to a minor, the penalty increases to a 30-day license suspension or a fine of $4,950. Previously, the penalty was a 10-day license suspension or or a $1,650 fine. The commission reevaluated penalties after reviewing recent compliance reports on minor decoy operations. Those checks showed marijuana retailers to be 81% compliant with the law. Meanwhile, the past 2 years of minor decoy operations for alcohol retailers have showed 79% compliance. The penalty for first-time offense for the unintentional sale of alcohol to a minor remains at marijuana's previous 10-day license suspension or $1,650 fine. In an exclusive interview with the Marijuana Agenda, OLCC Director Steve Marks said comparing marijuana and alcohol carding rates was a, quote, specious comparison, end quote, because there are only roughly 500 marijuana retailers, but, quote, thousands and thousands, end quote, of alcohol retail outlets. A recently introduced bill would allow residents to use oil extracted from cannabis plants in staunchly anti-marijuana Idaho, as long as the product is prescribed by a licensed practitioner. Under the proposed legislation, Idahoans seeking to use the oil for medical purposes for themselves or their minor children would have to apply to the Idaho Board of Pharmacy for a cannabidiol registration card. Cannabidiol, otherwise known as CBD oil, comes from cannabis but contains little or no THC. Governor Butch Otter vetoed legislation in 2015 that would have allowed children with severe forms of epilepsy to use CBD oil. Currently, 18 states that don't otherwise have medical marijuana or legalized marijuana allow use of low THC, high CBD products for medical reasons in limited situations or as an affirmative legal defense. The House Health and Welfare Committee in Idaho introduced the bill Thursday. It must now pass a full hearing. Health Canada is reducing the security requirements for federally licensed medical cannabis cultivators. Health Canada has drawn on 4 years of experience and nearly 1,000 physical inspections of producers to determine that the current requirements for physical security, specifically requirements that producers maintain a high security vault, do not align with the existing evidence of risks to public health and safety. Effective immediately, licensed producers will no longer be required to meet the previous vault storage measures. In addition, licensed producers will no longer be required to maintain 24/7 video surveillance inside the rooms where cannabis is being cultivated, propagated, or harvested. A pilot study suggests that psilocybin, the hallucinogenic ingredient in magic mushrooms, along with psychological support, might produce lasting changes in attitudes and beliefs. Researchers were investigating the effects of psilocybin on nature-relatedness and libertarian-authoritarian political perspective in patients with treatment-resistant depression. They found that nature-relatedness significantly increased and authoritarianism significantly decreased for patients 1 week after the dosing sessions. At 7 to 12 months post-dosing, nature-relatedness remained significantly increased and authoritarianism remained decreased. The study is small and causality cannot be established, but the researchers believe the possibility of drug-induced changes in belief systems seems sufficiently intriguing and timely to deserve further investigation. This has been your Cannabis Headline News.
You're listening to the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
Now that California has legalized recreational marijuana, you need to get the latest expertise on the rules and regulations governing this multi-billion-dollar market. The International Cannabis Business Conference is the longest-running event of its kind in California. Join us at the Hyatt Regency San Francisco for the 4th annual ICBC and the first conference in California after legalization. You'll be treated to focused presentations from California's top industry experts, featuring the head of California's Cannabis Commission, Lori Ajax. At the VIP reception, you'll have the chance to meet marijuana legend and new cannabis entrepreneur Tommy Chong. After the conference, you'll be treated to a VIP after-party featuring DJ Muggs from Cypress Hill. It's the International Cannabis Business Conference in San Francisco, February 1st and 2nd at the Hyatt Regency. Visit internationalcbc.com for details. Make sure you log on to internationalcbc.com for your tickets to California's first marijuana business conference under legalization.
You're not high. You're listening to the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
This is high-purity THC content marijuana, and it's not a healthy substance.
Okay, maybe you're a little high.
Looking for the 420 friendliest way to visit beautiful legal Potland, Oregon?
I'm Lori Duckworth, inviting you to come stay with us at Delta 9 House and Studios.
You get your own private room with queen bed and access to our high-speed Wi-Fi, premium entertainment system, and more.
We'll even cook you breakfast. Look us up on Facebook at Delta 9 House.
That's facebook.com/Delta9House. Delta 9 House is booked through Airbnb.com. City of Portland permit number 17-159855.
Marijuana is an addictive drug which produces in its users insanity, criminality, and death. Marijuana is the most violence-causing drug in the history of mankind. If the hideous monster Frankenstein came face-to-face with the monster of marijuana, he'd drop dead of fright.
You know, it's not easy trying to debunk 80 years of anti-marijuana propaganda in a 1-hour podcast, but let's try. It's time for the Marijuana Agenda's Reefer Madness Debunked.
Well, look, folks, I was born and raised in Idaho, and we had an old saying about our state when I lived there. Welcome to Idaho. Set your clock back 30 years. When you bring up the issue of marijuana legalization, that saying is eerily accurate. I was forwarded a reply from Idaho Senator Jim Risch to one of his constituents who had asked about the legalization of marijuana. True to form, the senator's opinions on the issue are completely uninformed by the results from 29 states that have legalized medical marijuana and now 9 states that have legalized the adult use of cannabis. And given the ratio of falsehoods to words in this letter, I'm kind of surprised Trump didn't select him for a cabinet position. Let me give you the meat of it, because there's 4 big Reefer Madness greatest hits in here that we want to get to. This is Senator Risch, who wrote, quote, legalization would likely cause many who do not use marijuana or other illegal substances to experiment with it, which could lead to addiction or experimentation with other dangerous drugs. What? What's this would likely? As if we don't have 4 states with data on the subject. Now look, youth use of marijuana has not increased in the states that have legalized adult use. But adult use, and specifically seniors, has increased. Now, I don't think that's controversial. For adults who avoided doing something enjoyable that's illegal, might then decide to try it once it's legal. Is that harmful, though? Did that lead to addiction to marijuana, experimentation with other drugs, or addiction to other dangerous drugs? Well, let's look some data up here. According to the National Survey of Substance Abuse Treatment Facilities, in 2012, before any state marijuana legalization took effect, there were about 1.25 million rehab clients. In 2016, when 2 states had been legal for 3 years, there were about 1.15 million rehab clients. And remember, we're talking about a time when more people were insured and laws had been passed that mandated treatment of substance abuse issues. So fewer people going to rehab. Well, did more people try using drugs other than marijuana? They got data for that. You look up at the National Survey on Drug Use and Health. In 2012, there were 3.27% of the people age 12 and older who had used a drug other than marijuana in the past month. In 2016, that figure rose to 3.42% of the population, 12 and older. Aha! More people did experiment with drugs. But when you drill down to Colorado and Washington, it's not so clear. Colorado's rate increased from 3.64 to 3.77, but that increase was driven by people 18 and older. Among the 12 to 17 age group, illicit drug use, other than marijuana, dropped from 4.14 to 2.74. And in Washington state, illicit drug use rate dropped from 3.89 to 3.58 overall for everybody. And it went down from 4.49 to 2.57 among the teenagers. So did legal marijuana lead to more illicit drug addiction? It's kind of a hard stat to come by, because there has been a massive increase in addiction problems related to opioids. But that's not marijuana's fault. The director of the National Institute on Drug Abuse told Congress she blames, quote, drastic increases in the number of prescriptions written and dispensed, greater social acceptability for using medications for different purposes, and aggressive marketing by pharmaceutical companies, end quote, as the factors leading to greater opioid addiction, not marijuana legalization. And let's not forget the numerous studies we are finding, the surveys that are showing 25% fewer opioid-related deaths, less opioid pill prescribing, fewer opioid rehab admissions, etc., in the states that have legal access to cannabis. And looking deeper, when you hear that quote from Idaho Senator Jim Risch there, It's underlying it is that hoary old gateway drug myth. The idea that smoking pot somehow primes your brain to enjoy altered states, necessitating an increasing panoply of drug intake to overcome tolerance to altered states. But isn't it funny how that gateway drug idea doesn't apply to legalized alcohol? For some reason, Senator Risch believes that adults who enjoy achieving that altered state of mind from alcohol don't become tolerant to it and never seek any increasing highs. Marijuana is like special somehow. He goes on. This is more from Senator Risch. He says, quote, if marijuana was legalized, the problem of impaired motorists would increase significantly. This, of course, is the old SMOF, stone mayhem on the freeways. But it's unclear from the current data. As prohibitionists, they like to tout statistics showing a greater number of fatality drivers who are found to have pot in their system. But that doesn't tell us anything about their impairment, since pot stays in your system long after the impairment has worn off. Prohibitionists also tout figures showing more driving fatalities overall. But transportation officials attribute that to increased speed limits, cheaper gasoline leading to more miles driven, drivers distracted by electronic devices, and increasing leniency in enforcing speed limits and seatbelt laws. And keep in mind, this concern about the public safety on the roads is coming from a senator from a state that has a top speed limit of 80 miles an hour and doesn't require motorcyclists to wear helmets. So take his concern about traffic safety with a grain of salt. He continues, quote, in addition, marijuana contains even more dangerous carcinogens than tobacco. Yeah, but did you know that dihydrogen monoxide contains a molecule that is 10 times more flammable and 20 times more explosive than gasoline? This old talking point, I call it the dihydrogen monoxide talking point. It's this relative of the marijuana contains over 400 chemicals. A talking point that tries to use ignorance of chemistry to scare the reader by citing the cancer risks of some of those chemicals. And let me get the dihydrogen monoxide thing. That's water, folks. Water is made up of two hydrogen molecules, dihydrogen, and one oxygen molecule, monoxide. And those two chemicals, as prohibitionists call them, and those hydrogen molecules in there, by themselves, hydrogen by itself is extremely flammable and explosive, 10 times more flammable and 20 times more explosive than gasoline. But obviously, water is not explosive because chemistry matters. Yes, cannabis has many constituent molecules in it. And when burned, like any plant matter, the combustion will create some carcinogenic compounds. But cannabis also has a molecule called delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, THC, which seems to have an anti-tumoral effect. Other cannabinoids may as well have cancer-fighting properties, and there's still a lot of research to be done, and stymied as it is by marijuana's Schedule I designation. But the bottom line is that while, quote, more than 400,000 people die each year from diseases related to the use of tobacco, end quote, 0 die from diseases related to the use of marijuana. And there's an uncounted number of cancer patients who've even cured their disease by using marijuana. In other words, just because something has parts that are carcinogenic doesn't mean that something causes cancer any more than water being 2/3 hydrogen makes it flammable and explosive. And furthermore, you don't have to smoke marijuana. You can vaporize it, eat it, drink it, rub it on your skin, and get none of the carcinogens related to plant matter combustion. And of course, Idaho Senator Jim Risch closes with one of my favorites, quote, the public health risks far outweigh any economic benefit that could be derived from taxes on the sale of marijuana, end quote. This is the old Sabbath conjecture. Look, the legal marijuana industry has generated so far about $1 billion in tax revenue. So Senator Risch proving that statement would be as simple as quantifying at least $1 billion in demonstrable public health harms in the states that have raised that tax revenue. It can't be done. You cannot show me. I'd give you 1/10 You show me $100 million of social costs, I'd give that to you. And that's without even considering the savings in law enforcement, judicial system, the extra payroll tax, the rise in property tax values. Come on, give me a break.
You can't handle the truth.
Oh, how perfect was that one? Thank you, Lieber Mater. Yeah, Senator Risch from the state of Idaho, sad to say he's actually representing his constituents quite accurately, because the last poll, 2015, showed 53% of Idahoans strongly oppose legalization, another 11% somewhat. They're at 1/3 support for legalization, which is where the nation was in 2001. We're back with OLCC's Steve Marks after this. If you work in the cannabis industry, consume marijuana, or just support freedom, you need to know about breaking policy news that affects you. Marijuana Moment is the daily newsletter that helps you stay on top of all the latest and most important state, federal, and international cannabis developments. Brought to you by longtime legalization activist Tom Angel, Marijuana Moment puts a concise yet comprehensive overview of cannabis news in your inbox early every weekday morning. Wake up to Marijuana Moment and rest assured you'll be ready for the cannabis news that's driving the day. Subscribe now at marijuanamoment.net.
The Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
This whole country needs to not be so lackadaisical about drugs. They say much of the addiction starts with marijuana.
Whatever you're smoking, it's not marijuana. The Marijuana Agenda is a listener-supported independent podcast brought to you by Radical Russ Media, LLC. Subscribe to our VIP feed at mjagenda.com for access to our ad-free podcast segment archive. Make a one-time donation to support the Marijuana Agenda at paypal.me/radicalruss. Now, in the interest of fair and balanced journalism, the Marijuana Agenda presents this anti-drug public service announcement.
It's got to be tonight, right? It's got to be tonight.
Did you know that thousands of men are impotent because they smoked? Probably not, because they don't like to talk about it. Every cigarette you smoke causes fatty deposits that restrict the flow of blood to your penis. And this damage is happening right now. For help and advice on giving up, call 0800 169 0169.
This has been an actual anti-drug public service announcement. To combat this and other drug war hysteria, listen to the Marijuana Agenda every weekday at 3 p.m. Pacific at live.mjagenda.com or download the free podcast at mjagenda.com. The Marijuana Agenda free podcast is available on iTunes, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, TuneIn, Google Play, SoundCloud, and on our Facebook page at MJ Agenda. Free video archives are available at the Radical Russ channel on YouTube. Help keep this media free by making a donation at paypal.me/radicalruss. You're listening to the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
It's like I picked the wrong week to quit smoking.
Learn more at mjagenda.com.
New beginner guitars and banjos are often constructed much better than ones built before your time. Why struggle? Get a new instrument or fix the old one. The trusted professionals at the Fingerboard Extension will evaluate your instrument for free. Repairs are priced for people who work for a living. Stop by the Fingerboard Extension downtown Corvallis at 120 Northwest 2nd Street today, or check out its inventory on the web at fingerboardextension.com.
Total war against public enemy number one.
10 federal criminal penalties for up to 1 ounce of marijuana.
Marijuana is probably the most dangerous drug.
Legalization is just another word for surrender.
I experimented with marijuana and didn't inhale.
This is not medicine. This is a Cheech and Chong show.
Encourage people to use less drugs.
I am here.
That was the point.
I think it would be a mistake to legalize.
Negative reports coming out of Colorado.
Good people don't smoke marijuana.
Radical Rant.
Well, today on the Rant, I get to reflect on an interview that I conducted a couple of days ago at the Cannabis Collaborative Conference at the Portland Expo Center. And I'm going to play just a little bit of it for you just so you get the idea of kind of how busy and hectic and loud it was here at this Cannabis Collaborative.
We're here with Stephen Marks. He's the director of the Oregon Liquor Control Commission, which handles the regulation and oversight of cannabis industry here in the state of Oregon.
So as you can hear, right, it's just very, very busy. And they've got announcements going on in the background, and I'm kind of standing off to the side with the director of the Oregon Liquor Control Commission, Steve Marks. So if you actually want to listen to the audio, or it's on video as well, go to the new radicalruss.com page, and you'll find it there right on the front page. Oregon's top marijuana regulator on why it's easier for kids to get alcohol. The video's there. It's only a 3-minute video, and you can, if you put on headphones, you can make out what he's saying. But if you can't, I've got a whole transcript. I transcribed what he had said, and it's really, it seems like every day I have a new feeling of revulsion about this situation. Not the man. Steve Marks, nice guy. He's very gracious in talking to me. But just about this blind spot we have in America for alcohol. Just this absolute disregard for the mayhem, the violence, the death, the disease that alcohol causes, comparatively to how we freak the F out about marijuana. And this is just this example of what's going on this week with the minor decoy operations is just crystallizing some of my feelings about this. You know, alcohol gets this free pass because it's part of our culture for thousands of years. Gets this free pass, gets its entire separate identity. Alcohol has its own identity. You notice how they say alcohol and drugs. It's Drug and Alcohol Awareness Week. Alcohol gets a pass from being a drug. And so for some reason, the 88,000 people it kills and the massive amounts of domestic violence it produces, and for some reason, all of that is just fine. It's this acceptable cost of being able to have a beer at your local pub. But that same level of risk-reward ratio doesn't get applied to cannabis, and it's just pissing me off. I swear, I'm going to start an organization called TALM, Treat Alcohol Like Marijuana. Let's say every law that you propose for marijuana, let's apply it to alcohol. So I get riled up about this because when I first heard this, they'd done a presentation. I'll just read you my question to Stephen Marks was, during your presentation, it was brought up, the fact that we just recently did minor decoy operations. And in the decoy operations, the 6 conducted, the marijuana retailers were coming in with an 81% compliance rate. About 1 in 5 kids who tried could get in. So I did some number crunching and found that for 2017 and 2016, the alcohol compliance rate was 79%. And in the past 2 years, OLCC has done little more than half as many checks on alcohol as it has done on marijuana, or as it done the prior 2 years. So my question is, has the Commission's need to regulate marijuana detracted from its mission to stop minors from getting alcohol as well? Is regulating marijuana and alcohol together causing a problem for regulating alcohol? So that was my initial question to him, right? Here we are. The presentation made a big deal. 6 checks have been done, right? Thousands of checks have been done for alcohol that have set this rate at 79%, 80%. Thousands of checks for alcohol. 6 days worth of checks with, 86 total operations conducted. So with your small little sample of 86, we're freaked out about an 81% compliance rate. A compliance rate that was brought down by shops on the Green Mile here in Portland. Thanks, guys. But nonetheless, 81% compliance rate is reason to freak out. But when it comes to alcohol, thousands of compliance checks, they're doing worse than marijuana. Why are we not freaking out about this? So here was his answer. And this surprised me because it's a stunning admission. He says, quote, this is Stephen Marks, quote, and I asked, is regulating marijuana and alcohol together causing a problem for regulating alcohol? He says, quote, well, it did initially because we used liquor inspectors to help us get licensing done early on as fast as we did it. So we did detract from the resources out of enforcement and licensing for liquor to work on getting this industry up and running, end quote. The head of the Oregon Liquor Control Commission, the organization tasked with the regulation of both alcohol and cannabis, has just admitted to me on tape that having to put so much regulatory compliance into marijuana, the product that is non-toxic, detracted from its mission, the one that's actually in its name, liquor control, detracted from its mission of controlling liquor when it came to enforcement and licensing. And enforcement, of course, includes minor decoy operations, because when I look at this, our industry began in October of 2015 when we began the early sales to all adults at the existing medical marijuana dispensaries. And then it really ramped up in 2016 and 2017, right? Well, that corresponds to what I found in the data for the minor decoy operations on alcohol retailers. In 2016 and 2017 combined, there were only 54% as many operations conducted as the years 2014 and 2015 combined. And the rate of compliance dropped from 81 and 80% to the 79% compliance for the last 2 years. Maybe the next states looking to legalize marijuana will learn from Oregon and form a separate commission for the regulation of cannabis like California has done. And it was then that Stephen Marks pivoted, because people get, again, going back to the theme of the separate pass, the special rights that alcohol gets. Anytime you bring up the alcohol to marijuana comparison, it flusters and they do not like being held to that. So Stephen Marks continued, quote, "You know, and people do make the comparison to minor decoy statistics to alcohol. Well, I have 500 retailers." He means marijuana retailers. "I have 500 retailers. All you've got to do is look at the box on the ID." He's referring to, in Oregon, if you're a minor, you got a red border around your picture. You just got to look for the red box, right? Continued. "We have information on what it is, the simplest of things to comply with in our system. And you know, with experience, we expect to see a rate much more like the high rate for Colorado and Washington. They're closer in the high 90s. And I'm for that. Yeah, I want to let's get the rate as high as we can get it, but it is a rate, right? What difference does it make how many retailers of the substance there are? Any one retail clerk at a location that sells either alcohol or marijuana isn't affected by the total number of retail clerks statewide. The facts are that about 1 in 5 times a kid tries to buy alcohol or marijuana in Oregon, he or she is not carded. It's the people selling the substance that's the problem, not the substance they're selling." And he continues, this is Steve Marks' continuing quote. "But, people were, and I was disappointed because I thought our industry was ahead of this game. I thought we had done enough and rolled out enough to get there. Portland metropolitan area is particularly bad, and we've got to get a correction to this. So you're going to see some enforcement. You're going to see us taking tough actions on this. It's important right now, but we do expect it to come into compliance." End quote, Stephen Marks. And we've seen that tough action, as we mentioned in the news this episode, how the Oregon Liquor Control Commission has tripled the penalties for selling to minors when it comes to marijuana in direct retaliation for the 6 days worth of compliance checks they've committed. They've taken the whole penalties and slid it over one box, where you used to have to get four failures. Now 3 failures cost you your license. Where it used to be a 10-day suspension or a $16.50 fine, now it's a 30-day suspension and a $49.50 fine. But I continued and followed up by asking, well, with the characterization of it being bad, though, when we're outperforming alcohol, is alcohol equally as bad? And what is the commission doing to fix that? And this quote. Stephen Marks turns and says, quote, "It's a specious comparison in my mind. I know you make it, Russ, and a lot of people have, and it's legitimate to do that. But in alcohol, there's sales and service, and there's thousands and thousands of locations. This, we're talking about, 500 that are like just looking for one simple thing on the ID. So we should have a higher compliance rate here." Again, that special pass alcohol gets, because alcohol sold at bars and restaurants and in parks and movie theaters, and you can get it at a convenience store or a grocery store or a liquor store, means it's harder to check for that red box on someone's ID? If anything, having thousands and thousands of alcohol outlets means you should be spending more time and more attention and raising the penalties on the alcohol outlets. Think about this. The top regulator for alcohol and marijuana says it's specious to compare the enforcement of roughly 500 marijuana outlets to the enforcement of roughly thousands and thousands of alcohol outlets. It's the same one simple thing on the ID, and the alcohol retailers are statistically worse at it. But wait a minute, is the idea that since there's so many more alcohol outlets, there's a less chance they're going to get a minor compliance check done on them, especially if in the past 2 years there's been about half as many being done? So now they're more willing to take the risk to sell to kids, knowing the chances of getting caught are less? If that's the case, again, doesn't that argue for more resources into compliance checks for alcohol, not fewer? And Stephen Marks continued, quote, "And while we've created this industry in the imagery of the alcohol system, I think the marijuana industry ought to aspire to be better than that system in a lot of ways. If you look at interstate regulation of alcohol, it is terrible. I'm not sure that's what the industry for marijuana wants. As marijuana legalization moves across the country, I think you've got to have a more standardized system than that. And I think it should be more standardized more than alcohol is," end quote. Standard. I wish I could have followed up to ask him what he thought about the interstate regulation of marijuana. Just north of us in Washington, adults can't cultivate their own cannabis or buy it in bulk. Vermont just established a law that allows no cannabis commerce. Nevada has a criminal misdemeanor with a $600 fine for toking in public. Colorado expressly forbids the commingling of medical and recreational cannabis. None of the 9 legal marijuana states can engage in any interstate commerce. I think we'd love to have interstate regulation of marijuana similar to alcohol. Closing, Stephen Marks says, quote, just as a philosophy, I think we can't lean too heavily on the comparison to alcohol," end quote. And I replied, well, they are difficult to compare since one of them could actually kill a child and the other one couldn't. I appreciate your time. And that's the crux of this whole issue. That pass that alcohol gets, to be told as an adult marijuana consumer that I shouldn't smoke marijuana in front of the kids, or that they might want to mimic what I do, that I shouldn't be free to consume in a public place because of, oh my God, what if the public saw someone smoking marijuana? I can't have a bar or a lounge like my friends that drink alcohol do because, oh my God, we got to worry about the children. We don't want to normalize this, and our advertisement must be restrained, and we can't have giveaways and samples or tastings like they do for alcohol. We can't have the things like wineries can have. We just can't have any of that. And our substance doesn't kill anybody. God, that's just the most frustrating thing about it, to turn this blind eye to alcohol. And they always come back and they say, look, that's the point, is that alcohol's already killing so many people. So why would we want to have marijuana? We did badly enough by making the 2 worst drugs legal. Why should we make the safest one legal? They can't even hear themselves. They can't even see the twisted pretzel logic of it all. Why, oh, why would we want to give people struggling with pain or boredom or insomnia a safer, healthier option? Why would we want to do that? That makes no sense to their perspective. And now, the news release coming out, stiffening the penalties on the underage sales of marijuana, as was mentioned in the news. And as you consider this, remember that we had the 4 straight years now, 4 straight years where alcohol compliance has declined on an annual rate basis, 2 straight years where the number of checks being done on alcohol has declined, and yet they still get 4 strikes before they lose their license, where marijuana only gets 3. They still get 10 days or $16.50 as their fine for their first offense, whereas marijuana gets triple that. And this would all be funny, and this would all be a fun little radical rant if it weren't for this other little factoid that crossed my desk today. Oregon alcohol deaths highlighted in national study. Matthew D. Kaplan from the Oregon Injury Lawyer blog, quote, Oregon has the third highest rate of alcohol-related deaths in the country, 22.2 per 100,000 residents, placing it behind only New Mexico and Wyoming. That statistic is worrying enough on its own, but it is even more disturbing to learn that, quote, alcohol deaths in Oregon more than doubled between 1999 and 2015, end quote, according to a recent article in the Oregonian. So how about it, OLCC? How about getting tough on alcohol? You're going to see us taking tough actions on this. It's important right now. We expect it to come into compliance. He's referring to the herb that doesn't kill anybody, not the alcohol-related deaths I just mentioned.
Follow MJ Agenda on Facebook, Pinterest, Instagram, YouTube, and follow MJ Agenda Show on Twitter. Learn more at mjagenda.com.
For everyone here at Delta 9 Houses Studios, I'm Radical Russ. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back next week, Monday, Tuesday, and then Wednesday we start our weekly podcast schedule. Thanks for sticking with me. And until next time, take care of each other, tokers.